Thank you very much for that, and thank you for the warm welcome this morning and for being here as people committed to both the research and the practice as well as policy related to newcomers to Canada, whether they are new citizens, whether they are immigrants or come as refugees or asylum seekers. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today representing or on behalf of the Honourable Ahmed Hussein, who is the Minister responsible for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. And while I am not part of the department, and very much our government is attempting to say that Parliament and government work together side by side as the parliamentary and the executive branches of government, we are bound together in our work as we attempt to find ways for Canadians to welcome, to integrate, and to support newcomers to this country. I am a new chair to the committee, and I've just started this work last October, but not really a newcomer to the issues that you will be discussing over these next number of hours, 2 days. Partly because I represent the riding of Don Valley West. And in Don Valley West, we have Thorncliffe Park, which is one of the welcoming centers for newcomers who are arriving in Canada. Between 25 and 30,000 people live there, and it is well known as a place that receives newcomers from around the world and continually changes and evolves as newcomers change and evolve. And so a big part of my work is both finding ways to support them and ways to understand the gifts that they bring as well as the challenges that they face. The other part is, I will confess, I am married to an academic, and he is at Ryerson, and he has taught in the Immigration and Settlement program at Ryerson at the master's level, and so I live with these issues on a day-to-day basis in the way that he has done research and teaching in the field of language and migration. And so I very much respect the fact that many of you come as researchers and hope that your research and as well as those who are practitioners in the field will feel very free to feed into the process that is the Citizenship and Immigration Committee of the House of Commons. We regularly do studies, we regularly engage with practitioners as well as academics to find ways to prompt the government, to provoke the government, and to promote the ideas that we think are important on the issues that you care so much about that bring you here today. I think everyone in this room knows that newcomers to this country bring huge economic opportunity and are part of the sustainability of our Canadian economy and our Canadian society. But as Stacey, as Chief Laforme said, we also have the sense that we are not simply an economic unit. We are a cultural set of cultural units, and we are a social body, and the gifts in arts and language and culture that are brought into this country every day as newcomers arrive at airports and across the borders into this country make Canada not only economically viable, but culturally viable. And I think we can all agree that Canada's future is very much dependent upon a very successful and optimistic approach towards immigration in this country. Pathways to Prosperity Partnership, I think, brings together key partners who are able to advance many of these ideas and help us to do our thinking. As I've looked at your agenda, and I'm very glad that Madeleine Chessoy from our Library of Parliament is here, and I'm just giving her a little shout out that she is the brains behind the committee that makes us look good, because the Library of Parliament takes the ideas that come out of conferences like this. I know that she's going to be saving all the outcomes from here, and as we do studies and as we engage legislation, your thoughts will form our thinking through the Library of Parliament and its research. So, Madeleine, I'm very glad that you are here today, because I will forget what I say and you'll remember what I say and do. Each one of us acts in a different way to understand the psychosocial impacts, the very real challenges that are both faced by Canada in a world where immigration is changing and by the newcomers themselves who face individual challenges. And this morning I'm going to share some of the thinking that the government has, as well as some of the thinking that our committee has as we approach these issues together. Your theme is Canada's place in the world, and from an immigration standpoint, Canada is an extremely attractive destination for many. Over the past year, I've traveled to about 8 different African countries. I've been to China, I've been to Europe, I've been to Latin America, and each time I go, I hear people asking me more about Canada and about the possibilities, both economically and culturally and socially, of coming to Canada and what Canada could offer them. However, Canada now faces a different market in the world of immigration because countries around the world face some of the similar challenges that we face, and we are now attempting to attract the very best, the brightest, and the most hopeful newcomers to this country, competing very frankly with other countries in the world. Countries like China and India are growing their own economies, and they're growing their own ways of making sure that their citizens engage appropriately in both the economic and social life of their countries. And so they want their own opportunities for their young people. Canada, however, faces huge demographic challenges, and it's absolutely critical that we find ways to encourage people to choose Canada first, and then once they're here, to make Canada their home. Immigration is certainly not a silver bullet to solve all of Canada's problems, but it is an important part of ensuring that the Canada that has been founded and began with First Nations, Indigenous people, and with settling peoples, as well as newcomers for the last 150 years, becomes the Canada of the future that will lead the world on many different fronts. We have labor force challenges, we have an aging population, and we have a low birth rate. And those factors make it absolutely essential that we have an immigration policy that is advanced, is progressive, is interesting, and is creative. Innovation will become key in the field of immigration. In 1971, not that long ago, there were 6.6 people working for every senior citizen living in the country. By 2012, that had dropped to 4.2 to 1, so 4 people working for every senior citizen. That ratio is projected to drop to 2 to 1 by the year 2036, fewer than 20 years from now. 5 million Canadians are set to retire by then, hopefully me, and in 2 decades, almost 100% of Canada's net annual population growth will be through immigration. It already accounts for about 65% of our immigration growth. And if we're going to be able to keep our commitments to universal health care, public pensions, social programs, education programs, as well as keep our country vibrant and creative and interesting, our immigration policy needs to adapt and change and be innovative. To be the kind of country we are means that we need a creative immigration policy and a set of practices and procedures to integrate people that will make Canada competitive in the world. In recognition of immigration's important role in our country's future, our government just unveiled an historic multi-year immigration levels plan, and I know that most of you will already know this, but under this plan, for the first time, we have a 3-year approach to immigration, looking at the levels of newcomers coming to this country. In 2018, we plan to bring in 310,000 permanent residents, up to 330,000 in 2019, and by 2020 will be 340,000. We are not yet at the 1% of our population in terms of immigration, but we will be over 9%, and I believe that while some experts have said we need to reach that within 20 years, I believe we'll reach that far sooner. This plan will result in really the most ambitious immigration levels in recent history and represents a major investment in the people that make immigration happen in this country. Our current immigration levels stand at about 0.8%. It will bring it up to 0.9%, And as I said, hopefully 1% of our population will be newcomers into Canada within a very short period of time. Those levels include obviously economic class, family class, and other ways that people come into this country. And as a new chair of immigration, I am constantly trying to understand the systems by which people come into Canada, understanding that they are constantly changing, making the lives of settlement workers quite difficult at times, to say nothing about immigration lawyers. Immigration levels are meant to respond to two different things. One is the changing demographics of this country to ensure that we keep culturally vibrant, but also labor force demands. In order for Canada to continue to compete in the global marketplace, it's critical to have mechanisms in place that will allow us to attract the brightest and the best. Canada's economic immigration programs, I think, are well positioned to attract the best and the brightest. But we also have to be nimble to attract to Canada the global talent that will drive investment in immigration. Let me say also at this time, I'm focusing on immigration, not on refugees, but recognize the huge role that Canada needs to play in the world with respect to both convention refugees who come into Canada either under government or private or blended sponsorship, as well as those asylum seekers who cross into our borders who deserve a fair and absolutely just hearing to determine whether they need protection as protected people in Canada. Today I'll be focusing, however, on economic migrants and the programs that are meant to accomplish that. Recently, the private sector has begun to play a more critical role in helping us develop our economic programs, and we're beginning to see some successes in that. The Global Skills Strategy will set highly skilled temporary workers here faster by processing their work permits and visas in only 2 weeks. This is part of what our Minister of Innovation, Navdeep Bains, has attempted to talk about, that companies, businesses, organizations, universities need to have workers coming in a much quicker way than has been in the past. And the goal is to process their work permits and visas in only 2 weeks. We're waiving the requirement for a work permit in the case of certain skilled foreign workers coming to Canada for very short-term jobs that help companies stay competitive and create new jobs. We're also launching a dedicated service channel to give personalized immigration support to foreign companies making significant job-creating investments in Canada. We want to help them navigate the immigration system, which is extremely complex. In the longer term, many skilled workers who've come to Canada temporarily as a result of the Global Skills Strategy may seek to immigrate to Canada on a permanent basis. In fact, an increasing number of the people we select for permanent immigration are already here as temporary foreign workers or international students. Now, veering from my script and offering a personal opinion, which is always dangerous, I am very much of the opinion that pathways to citizenship for all temporary workers is extremely important. And I will be working particularly hard on that to understand that absolutely there are people who choose to come to Canada as short-term workers, and we want to honor that. They sometimes don't want to move their lives to Canada, but want to have an economic life in this country, and we need to respect that. However, more of the people I encounter choose to come to Canada economically, work on a short-term basis, but recognize the value of becoming Canadian citizens, and we should find every way possible to make sure that happens, whether they are students who come as international students on visas and or as temporary foreign workers who come in to help us where we need workers. So that is a commitment that Rob Oliphant is making. It's not quite the commitment of the government yet. These are excellent candidates, and these are people who have already had a sense, whether they're international students or temporary foreign workers, who have an experience in Canada that we need to take advantage of. We have already attracted them, we've already engaged them, and they've already become engaged somewhat in Canada, and so we have a sense that they can make the best possible citizens that we want to attract. The other part of attracting people to this country is to keep a robust family class and high levels of family class reunification. The reality is that one of the comparative advantages that we have as a country is that we allow people to come bringing spouses, bringing their children, and bringing their parents. One of the realities is that and this is where the little joke comes in, as the party of family values, we actually do believe that families are important in terms of making citizens viable and integrating well into our country. And what happens is that we bring in their grandparents, their parents, their spouses, and that family unit then creates part of a society that is sustainable. Of course, another part of ensuring the immigration system serves the Canadian economy is by testing out new and innovative ideas. Now, I encourage you to check out the Citizenship and Immigration Committee website, and you will find that we have just completed a report on immigration to Atlantic Canada. And that came as a result of a member of Parliament who wanted to find ways to encourage the government of Canada to promote immigration, settlement, and the retention of immigrants to Atlantic Canada. And I needed to tell you, as a new chair, listening to the testimony, as a person from Toronto, where we are used to immigrants and we are used to newcomers and we're used to people who have brought new cultures or ideas or dress to our world, it was overwhelmingly emotionally positive for me to listen to Atlantic Canadians really begging for newcomers to come to their area and engaging in a way that I was very, very pleased to hear that they're looking for ways to build cultural and social infrastructure that will encourage people to stay regardless of what religion they're bringing to this country, what culture they're bringing, what language they're bringing, and finding ways to ensure that they become Atlantic Canadians committed to building those 4 provinces in a way that we and all the rest of Canada want to have happen. What the government has done for its part is, I think, one of the more innovative programs in immigration that is happening right now, and that is the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. And what the Atlantic Pilot does is it places an onus on employers who are bringing or attracting newcomers to Atlantic Canada to develop with a settlement agency an individualized settlement plan for everyone they're bringing. So right from the very start of someone being attracted to Canada, there's a plan that is put in place by the employer with the help of a professional agency on how that person is to integrate, to settle, to flourish in this country, recognizing that it takes resources to make sure that people have every opportunity to succeed. And if they succeed, we will not only have attracted them, but we will retain them. This is really an innovative program. It is too early to evaluate whether it's working yet, and you'll find in our report that we are already trying to look at a process evaluation to ensure that we learn from mistakes as the program develops. But there is a sense in the 4 Atlantic provinces that absolutely something new had to happen to both attract and retain. And I think for long-term outcomes, immigrants and their contributions to Canada, these kinds of pilot programs are critical. We know that successful integration takes more than a job. It takes a sense of belonging. It takes language acquisition. It takes a sense of ownership on the various parts of what Canadian citizenship involves. It takes a sense of safety and the ensuring that people are able to express themselves in culturally unique ways, and that Canada will grow and become. It's interesting that a number of years ago I was sitting in a small cafe in Copenhagen, and I happen to love Denmark. I think it is just one of those wonderful countries to go and visit. And as I was sitting in a cafe, a group of men walked by, and they were Turkish background. I could tell, having been to Turkey a number of times and understanding some of that culture. And I didn't know whether they had been there a day, a week, a year, 10 years, or 20 years, but I knew that in Denmark, they would never be Danish. They would always be Turkish. And if they had chosen to come to Canada, they'd become Canadian. They wouldn't even become Turkish Canadian. And over a period of hopefully not very many years, they would not only have been changed and evolved and become Canadian, but Canada would have changed and evolved and grown because of their participation in our society. That, I think, is what makes Canada successful. That is why we need robust immigration and settlement programs. That is why we need the best research and training and settlement services that the world can see in any place. And that is why, in places like Atlantic Canada, newcomers need to feel welcome so Canada can grow. Of course, we invest almost $1 billion a year in settlement services. It is a huge outpouring of money that we put in. And I'm not going to say there's more money available for settlement services. What we'll need to be doing is finding ways to innovate, to make those dollars go further, to encourage all Canadians to be engaged in the settlement process, and to find ways that Canada can become a welcoming and opening society. Many of you work on the ground. You're involved in engaging newcomers and working with people who are longtime Canadians, either First Nation or settled Canadians. And that work is critically important to us. We're hoping that you can come up with ideas, with concepts, and ways of evaluating what we as a government are doing to ensure that we can find a way to improve how we do it. I want to close with just a little movie review. This past week, and I don't get to go to many movies, and this is a so-called break week, and that just means that I work 14 hours a day in Toronto instead of in Ottawa. But on Sunday, I did get to go to a movie, the first one of the year, and I went to see Victoria and Abdul. And I'm really going to recommend this movie. It's Judi Dench and Ali Fazal, starring in a movie that looks at the last few years of Queen Victoria's reign. And she has an encounter with two men who have come from India. And she reminds her court a number of times that she's also the Empress of India. The wife of Abdul arrives after a little while, and she arrives completely dressed in chador, as does her mother. And this sort of horrifies the British court, but it doesn't horrify Queen Victoria. And how much of this is historical and how much of this is fiction, I'm not sure, but it is a story which is rooted in fact. But it was fascinating for me to watch Queen Victoria as she learns Urdu, as she learns a beautiful script, as she engages with Abdul Karim and his wife and her mother, and engages with them to understand that as a person of the world, she needs to have an open mind, an open spirit, and is engaged in a very life-giving way because of an encounter with an immigrant. I think each one of us who is a newcomer or not a newcomer can be engaged by that encounter, by that understanding that we are always made somehow a little bit bigger and a little bit better when we encounter the other and we welcome them. Thank you for the work you do. Engage with us and make us better at what we're trying to do. Thank you.